the day humanity was cast out. The Grand Convocation Chamber of the Galactic Council had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations for over 9,000 cycles. Empires had pleaded here. Worlds had been judged here. Entire species had been granted or denied the right to exist beyond their home systems. But never before had the chamber been so silent. At the center of the vast hall stood the human delegation. No escorts, no defensive guards, no arguments. Just 5 representatives in simple diplomatic attire, facing a semicircle of towering alien figures who filled the upper tiers of the chamber like living monuments. The charges had already been read. Humanity had violated Council Directive 88A. They had intervened in the Valoran containment zone. They had breached quarantine boundaries. They had disrupted containment fleets. They had interfered with the lawful sterilization of 3 infected frontier systems. Worst of all, they had evacuated the populations. Over 9 billion lives, removed from worlds the Council had already written off as statistically unsalvageable. The logic of the decision had been clear. The plague spreading through those systems was not merely biological. It was adaptive, mechanical, self-evolving. Containment was the only viable option. Sacrifice was the only logical cost. Every senior species in the Council understood this. Every species, except humanity. You acted without authorization, the presiding counselor declared, their voice resonating across the chamber through harmonic translators. You prioritized individual survival over galactic stability. A projection shimmered into existence above the floor. Images of human ships, sleek but modest, slipping past containment lines. Civilian transports lifting from burning cities. Human marines carrying alien children through decontamination corridors. You have destabilized a lawful containment effort, the counselor continued. Your actions risked spreading the contagion beyond acceptable probability margins. The lead human ambassador stepped forward. We prevented extinction, she said calmly. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The council did not deal in emotional terms. It dealt in probabilities, in acceptable losses, in survivable outcomes. You interfered with a necessary sacrifice, another counselor replied. Your intervention places trillions at potential risk. The ambassador did not raise her voice. We refuse to abandon sentient populations. A pause followed. Long, heavy. You place morality above survival, came the response. Yes, she said. The word echoed. Not defiant, not apologetic. Simply true. For the first time in centuries, the council faced something it did not know how to categorize. Humanity had not acted for territory, not for resources, not for influence. They had acted because they believed it was wrong to leave those worlds to die. And in doing so, they had broken the system. The council could not allow that. If one species defied logic, others might follow. Order would fracture. Sacrifices would become negotiable. Efficiency would collapse. And so the judgment was unanimous. Humanity is hereby suspended from council membership. No outcry came from the human delegation. Your access to shared trade corridors is revoked. Still silence. Your participation in interstellar governance is terminated. No protest. A final decree appeared in the chamber air. Humanity is deemed unfit for structured galactic stewardship. The words hung like a closing door. Across the hall, observers from dozens of minor species watched. Some with pity, some with fear, some with something dangerously close to admiration. The presiding counselor leaned forward. Do you contest this judgment? The human ambassador exchanged a brief glance with her companions. Then she faced the chamber. No. The simplicity of the answer sent a subtle ripple through the tiers. No threats, no appeals, no bargaining, only acceptance. The council had expected outrage, perhaps even desperation. Instead, humanity seemed relieved. Formal protocols were executed swiftly. Council identification codes were revoked. Diplomatic channels were closed. Trade authorizations terminated. Within minutes, humanity's status shifted from member species to independent actor. The ambassador inclined her head. Then we acknowledge your decision. Procedure required a closing statement, a final opportunity for reconciliation. Humanity may submit for review after a probationary period of, "That will not be necessary," she interrupted gently. The counselors stiffened. "We will proceed independently." The chamber grew colder. Independent species rarely thrived. Most collapsed under economic isolation or security pressure. Humanity had just chosen exile, without anger, without fear, without hesitation. As the delegation turned to leave, a quiet transmission passed through standard diplomatic channels. A simple coded message. Routine, unremarkable, or so it seemed. Only later would analysts decode its secondary layer. 3 embedded words. We adapt quickly. The chamber doors closed behind the departing humans. Inside, debate resumed almost immediately. Trade impacts, security risks, containment reassessment, procedural continuity. Humanity was discussed as a problem to be managed, a variable to be monitored, a cautionary example of emotional governance. But beyond the chamber, something had already begun to shift. Because for the first time since joining the galactic community, humanity was no longer bound by its rules. No oversight, no restrictions, no obligation to obey. They had been cast out as unpredictable, as unstable, as morally compromised. The council believed it had preserved order. What it had actually done was remove the leash, and humanity, quietly, was already deciding what came next. The species that didn't collapse. The galaxy expected humanity to fail. Expulsion from the Galactic Council was not a symbolic punishment. It was a slow death sentence. Council membership meant access to stabilized trade routes, shared technological databases, neutral diplomatic protection, collective defense guarantees. Without it, most civilizations spiraled into economic isolation within decades. Many never recovered. So when humanity left without protest, the Council assumed the outcome was inevitable. They began projecting timelines. 50 cycles to economic stagnation, 70 to internal fragmentation, 100 to political irrelevance. Humanity, according to every predictive model, would either beg for reinstatement or collapse. Instead, something unexpected happened. Nothing. No panic. No internal conflict. No desperate pleas for re-entry. Human shipping lanes did not shrink. They expanded. Within a single cycle of their expulsion, human vessels began appearing far beyond their former trade zones, in regions long ignored by Council commerce. The frontier. These were systems too distant, too unstable, or too politically insignificant to justify Council investment. Worlds where infrastructure lagged centuries behind. Species who had never been granted Council observer status. Civilizations that survived through improvisation rather than policy. To them, the arrival of human ships was unusual. To the Council, it was irrelevant. At first, human envoys did not arrive with treaties. They arrived with offers. Repair stations, medical exchanges, navigation upgrades, localized manufacturing platforms, and most striking of all, no loyalty clauses, no tribute demands, no hierarchical agreements, only partnership, mutual benefit, the humans called it. Frontier leaders were skeptical. Council powers had visited before, usually to extract resources or impose strategic oversight. Humanity offered neither. Instead, they shared modular technologies designed to function without centralized dependence. Agricultural stabilizers, atmospheric processors, defensive drone systems. They did not install them. They taught others how to build them. It was a subtle but radical difference. Within a decade, several minor systems no longer relied on external supply chains. They were self-sustaining, and they remembered who had helped them achieve it. The Council dismissed these developments as inconsequential. Frontier systems held little strategic value. Their independence posed no threat, until trade patterns began to shift. Small at first, a redirected convoy here, an independent shipping route there. But the trend was unmistakable. Minor species were bypassing Council-regulated trade hubs. Instead, they were linking through human-established corridors. corridors that had no tariffs, no compliance mandates, no political oversight, just open access. Council economists flagged the anomaly. It was labeled temporary, unstable, emotionally driven, but the growth continued. Human shipyards appeared in neglected asteroid belts. Joint medical academies formed on marginal worlds. Defense pacts emerged, not imposed but requested. Species long accustomed to being treated as expendable were discovering something new. Choice. Humanity did not demand alignment. They offered cooperation. And in doing so, they unintentionally challenged the Council's greatest unspoken principle: dependence. For millennia, stability had been maintained through managed reliance. Technology flowed downward. Authority flowed upward. Humanity disrupted both. A frontier species equipped with shared defensive systems no longer required Council protection. A world capable of manufacturing its own infrastructure no longer required Council trade subsidies. Autonomy spread quietly, system by system, sector by sector. The Council noticed. Observers were dispatched. Reports returned with a troubling conclusion. Human influence was not spreading through dominance. It was spreading through trust. No enforcement fleets accompanied their expansion. No coercive measures were recorded. No economic leverage was applied. And yet, alliances formed. A loose network of cooperative worlds began to take shape. Informal, unregulated, resilient. It lacked the rigid hierarchy of the Council, but it adapted quickly. When a mining colony suffered atmospheric failure, human engineers arrived within days, accompanied by volunteers from 3 neighboring species. When pirate raiders targeted independent trade routes, locally trained defense groups repelled them without Council intervention. Success bred confidence. Confidence bred independence. Independence bred alignment. Not with humanity as rulers, but with humanity as partners. The Council's predictive models began to fail. Humanity was not fragmenting. It was integrating, not internally, but externally. They were building relationships instead of dependencies. And where the Council maintained order through authority, humans cultivated stability through empowerment. A phrase began appearing in frontier communications, at first informally, then more widely. Shared strength is stronger. Council analysts noted it with mild concern. Philosophy was rarely a strategic threat, but this one carried consequences, because worlds that believed in shared strength were less likely to accept imposed sacrifice, less likely to tolerate abandonment, less likely to defer to distant logic. The Council had assumed humanity would fade into isolation. Instead, humanity was becoming a bridge, linking systems that had never trusted the galactic core, providing tools instead of commands, offering support without ownership. The transformation was slow, but unmistakable, and by the time the Council recognized the pattern, it had already spread too far to contain. Humanity had not collapsed. They had simply stopped asking for permission. And across the forgotten edges of the galaxy, others were beginning to do the same. The war that changed everything. The first Karthik signal was not a threat. It was a silence. A relay station on the far edge of mapped space simply stopped responding. No distress call, no debris field, no radiation spike, just absence. The Galactic Council logged it as a communications failure. Then another station went dark. Then a monitoring outpost. Then an entire patrol fleet. By the time the Council recognized the pattern, the truth had already arrived. The Karthik Dominion did not announce itself. It advanced. Their ships emerged from deep space like moving scars, angular, immense, and utterly silent. They did not broadcast. They did not negotiate. They harvested. Entire systems were stripped of infrastructure within days. Orbital platforms dismantled. Shipyards consumed. Population centers erased. Not destroyed, removed. The Council responded as it always had, with structure. Emergency sessions convened. Strategic committees formed. Risk projections initiated. Debate followed. Should containment lines be drawn? Should outer systems be abandoned to slow the advance? Should evacuation be authorized? Every decision required consensus. Every action required procedure. Time stretched. The Karthik advance did not. 3 frontier systems fell before the Council finalized its first coordinated response. Humanity did not wait. By the time Council fleets began mobilizing, human vessels were already in motion. But they did not move alone. From the edges of mapped space came ships bearing unfamiliar markings. Mining guild vessels, independent patrol craft, agrarian transports retrofitted for combat, defense flotillas from species the Council had once deemed strategically irrelevant. They did not gather under a single banner. They gathered under a shared purpose. Evacuation. Human doctrine had never focused on holding territory. It focused on preserving lives. And so the first battles of the war were not fought over planets, but over corridors. Human-led coalition fleets struck Karthik advance lines not to destroy them, but to create openings. Moments. Seconds. Enough time for civilian convoys to escape. Where the Council formed defensive walls, humans created moving pathways. When Karthik forces targeted population centers, they found them already empty. When they advanced toward infrastructure hubs, they encountered mobile defenses instead of fixed ones. Human strategy avoided direct confrontation. Instead, it attacked mobility. Supply convoys vanished. Navigation beacons failed. Command nodes suffered sudden, precise disruptions. The Karthik were powerful, but they were centralized. Their fleets moved with calculated efficiency. Their responses followed predictable escalation patterns. The coalition did not. Each system contributed what it could. Fast scouts became reconnaissance screens. Cargo haulers became shield carriers. Agricultural drones became mine layers. Human advisors did not command. They coordinated. The difference mattered, because a coordinated force adapts. An adaptation was something the Karthik Dominion had not faced before. The Council's first major engagement ended in catastrophe. A fortified defensive ring collapsed within hours. Fixed positions proved vulnerable to overwhelming force. Predictable formations were dismantled with brutal precision. The Council began planning a retreat. Humanity began planning a disruption. Coalition fleets struck behind advancing Karthik formations, not to win battles, to fracture momentum. They turned empty systems into traps, converted abandoned infrastructure into ambush points, forced the Dominion to defend its supply lines. For the first time, Karthik fleets slowed, then hesitated, then diverted. What had begun as an unstoppable advance became a contested expansion. Worlds once considered insignificant became resistance hubs. Civilizations the Council had never protected now protected one another. Shared defensive systems, originally built for independence, became force multipliers. And as the war stretched on, something remarkable became clear. The coalition was learning faster than the Dominion could adapt. Each engagement refined their tactics. Each loss informed their strategy. They were not bound by doctrine. They evolved. Human fleet commanders shared every breakthrough openly. No secrecy, no proprietary advantage. Every species improved together. The war stopped being a defense. It became a network. Karthik forces found themselves facing not a unified enemy, but 1,000 interconnected ones. And where the Dominion relied on dominance, the coalition relied on resilience. The turning point came at the Battle of the Luminous Expanse. A massive Karthik command fleet advanced toward a densely populated corridor. Council analysts predicted inevitable loss. Humanity predicted opportunity. Coalition forces did not meet the fleet head-on. They fragmented it. Supply ships vanished. Escort formations were drawn away by decoy signals. Navigation grids collapsed under coordinated cyber disruption. By the time the main Karthik force reached the corridor, it was alone. For the first time, the Dominion faced a battle on terms it had not chosen. And it faltered. The victory did not destroy the Karthik, but it changed something deeper. It proved they could be stopped. Across the galaxy, morale shifted. Resistance replaced fear. Initiative replaced hesitation. The Council watched as humanity did what procedure never could. They turned survival into strategy, and strategy into hope. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the galaxy was no longer losing. Rewriting the rules. The war did not end with a final battle. There was no single moment of triumph, no dramatic surrender. The Carthic Dominion simply stopped advancing. Their fleets withdrew beyond the outer dark, retreating to whatever distant territories they had emerged from. They left behind silent systems, broken infrastructure, and a galaxy that was no longer the same. The cost had been immense. Entire regions lay empty. Trade networks were shattered. Council defense fleets had suffered catastrophic losses. Yet against every prediction, civilization endured, not because of centralized command, not because of procedural authority, but because of something far less structured: cooperation. The coalition, once dismissed as an improvised network, had become the backbone of survival. Independent worlds shared reconstruction resources. Formerly minor species coordinated relief efforts across sectors. Human logistical frameworks, built during the war, shifted seamlessly from evacuation routes to supply chains. The recovery began before the Council even finalized its post-war assessment. And that was when the summons came. Humanity was invited back. The message was formal, respectful, urgent. The Galactic Council requested their reinstatement. Full membership, restored trade access, strategic partnership, acknowledgement of their wartime leadership. The offer was unprecedented. For the first time in its history, the Council was not demanding compliance. It was asking. The meeting took place in the same grand convocation chamber where humanity had once stood alone. This time, the hall was full. Representatives from dozens of independent systems attended as observers. Many of them owed their survival to the coalition. To humanity, the presiding counselor spoke carefully. The galaxy owes your species a debt, they began. Your actions preserved countless lives. Your leadership proved essential. A pause followed. We invite humanity to resume its place among us. The chamber waited. 2 centuries of precedent leaned toward a single outcome. Reinstatement meant influence, security, power. The human ambassador, the same one who had stood here during their expulsion, stepped forward. We appreciate the invitation, she said. Her tone was calm, measured, but we decline. The word struck harder than any refusal of exile ever had. Murmurs spread instantly. The counselor hesitated. You would remain outside the council? Humanity did not answer immediately. Instead, a projection appeared above the chamber floor. A network map, not of territory, but of connection. Systems linked through shared infrastructure. Mutual defense agreements. Open trade corridors. Joint research hubs. Dozens. Then hundreds. The structure had no central authority. No controlling capital. No ruling species. This, the ambassador said, is the concord of free systems. The chamber fell silent. It is not an empire, she continued. It is not a council. It is a framework. She outlined its principles simply. Membership was voluntary. Defense was mutual. Technology was shared. Sovereignty was absolute. No species could be sacrificed for stability. No world abandoned for efficiency. No decision imposed without consent. It was in every way the opposite of the system that had once expelled them. The war showed us something, she said. Survival does not come from control. It comes from cooperation. The counselors listened, some with skepticism, some with unease, some with something approaching understanding. The Concord does not replace the council, the ambassador added. It exists alongside it, an alternative, not enforced, but available for any who chose it. In the cycles that followed, the shift was subtle, then undeniable. Trade began flowing through Concord routes. Reconstruction projects favored cooperative partnerships over hierarchical contracts. Defense alliances formed without council oversight. Even several former core members requested observer status within the new framework. The council did not fall. Its authority remained. Its influence endured, but it was no longer the only path. Power was no longer defined by dominance. Stability was no longer enforced through dependence. The galaxy had changed, and the change had not come through conquest. Humanity had not seized control. They had not overthrown institutions. They had not demanded leadership. They had simply offered another way, one built on shared strength rather than imposed order. Over time, the concord grew, not rapidly, but steadily, because every world that joined did so by choice. And choice created commitment. Centuries later, historians would debate the moment the balance shifted. Some would point to the first evacuation at Valoran, others to the Battle of the Luminous Expanse. But most would agree on this. The day humanity was cast out of the Council was the day they stopped trying to fit within the galaxy's rules and started rewriting them, not through force, but through trust. And in doing so, they changed what power meant forever.